Okay,
All right. Now, Mark, would you please read that same passage, 15 to 19, in the NIV?
yes. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him.
Thank you, Mark. Now I want to pause just for a few minutes. I've asked Ginger to make a comment on this. You know, these days, if you read the internet or paper or watch television, you've been hearing about the supreme leader of Iran. Many of these Eastern countries call their leaders supreme, the supreme leader. And here in our country, we talk about the Supreme Court. And the word supreme means something pretty special. So, Ginger, when you hear this business about supreme, and Paul uses it several times here. He talks about Jesus is the supreme over all creation. He says, so that everything he might have the supremacy. And they talk about him being first. What comes to your mind when you hear that business about him being supreme?
Well, I thought to describe something that's absolutely the best. Dominant, the utmost, it's the first of everything.
Oh, that's good. Mark, what when you read this and when you thought about it, you're a military man. What does supreme mean to you?
Well, one of the things that comes to mind is a supreme commander,
Yeah.
which is a military term and someone who is in charge of a large group of people. Uh, It also brings to mind the highest rank or highest authority. Uh, And outside the military, of course, Supreme comes to mind with the Supreme Court. Uh, But another aspect of Supreme is ultimate. It's the ultimate, can be the ultimate sacrifice. It can also be of utmost importance or the ultimate test.
Well, that's good. That's excellent. You know, they lived in a very warlike environment, that whole early war, and you know, the whole Old Testament. In fact, God is often called the Lord of Heaven's armies. A lot of people criticize our faith, the Hebrew Christian faith, because there's so much in the Bible about God being the supreme leader of the military, and people just can't let that balance with this humble Jesus. And so that's true. The supreme had a lot of military connotations in those days. But I'm wondering, class, as you listen to these two folks and the scripture, when you think that Jesus is the supreme, he is looked at as supreme by Paul, and you know Paul's background somewhat. What are some of the things that some of you others think? What is he, if he's supreme in your life, what is he talking about being the supreme? Anybody have any thoughts?
Bill, I think that when I think of supreme, I think too that he is the supreme model for comparison about anything that you're told by others. Is it consistent with what the supreme leader says? Is their action? Is it something that Jesus talks about as behavior? Is this something that passes muster with that. And so you get into this whole thing of thoughts, words, and deeds being pleasing in His sight. Well, how do you know that? Well, just look to the words and examples of Jesus and you'll know it. You may not like the answer, but that is the supreme point of comparison.
Thank you, Rod. That's great. Anybody else have a thought? What does it mean for you for Christ to be supreme in your life? I think I saw Julie hand first.
Supreme kind of means to me and Christ first. He's first. And everything, you seek Him first and His righteousness before anything.
All right, that's good. Thank you, Judy. Julie, what do you have?
Yeah, for me, I didn't go down the academic or theoretical route. I thought of the Pizza Hut Supreme Pizza. I think it's because we were talking about Phyllis's cooking, but it's like a perfect balance of a lot of different things, and I do think that that's true with regards to Christ, in that it gives us everything, the perfect balance of everything that we need, that we might not know to order on our own, but it's been prepared for us.
That's great. Phyllis?
I'm with you, Julie. I like words. It's interesting. There is no word supremer. And I think in regard to that, I ask the question, is there anyone else who could have been nailed to the cross that accomplished what Jesus, the Supreme One, accomplished? That defines His supremacy to me.
Thank you, Phyllis. Anybody else?
Bill, Fred,
Yeah, Fred.
the throne supreme to me connotates authority and power. And Paul certainly saw the power of Jesus throughout his ministry with all the things that he did. And that may be one reason why he keeps using the term supreme.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else have a thought?
Bill, probably from the first time we started this, in these 5 verses, the word all jumps out at me. It's in there 3 times. So all things have been created, all things hold together, and God pleased to have all His fullness dwell in Him. And so there's nothing left after all. It's kind of, as Phyllis said, supreme. I mean, it's all. It isn't partially, or is it, some of, or mostly, is all. And as Pastor Frank Ritchie likes to tell us, all means all.
That's good. Well, one thing might help us too to remember when Paul wrote this, he used the word protuo for that word supreme and for the word first. It's translated both ways. Protuo. That was the Greek word that was sometimes translated first. Sometime it was translated one of a kind, and sometimes it was translated supreme. The word gave the emphasis in those days to the things that you've all said, and that is, He was one of a kind. Nobody like Him. In fact, he really hit the nail on the head when Paul said, as you noticed, he said He is in one of the translations there, you heard, I believe Mark read, He was everything that He might have supremacy. And then it went on to say that He is the firstborn among the dead. Firstborn. That was protuo, but it added to it tokos, first dead, meaning He was the first one who came up from the grave who didn't ever die again. Oh, there have been a lot of people raised from the dead, but nobody stayed alive. Everybody else died again. Jesus was the only one who rose from the dead and never died. He just went ascended to his Father because he and the Father were one. And we're going to read more about what Paul says about this. But this phrase that he, Jesus, was a supreme example, the supreme image of God himself. We're going to look at that and look at it a little more closely here as we move along. So, as we talk about Jesus being supreme, being the best that you can find, I have to remember back to when I was that child. To me, Jesus hit me so hard that Jesus was the best for me, meaning people could say, yeah, but Bill, what about this and what about that? And how do you explain that God being so mean and killing people in the Old Testament and all these wars and all that mess? And they'd say, how can you be a Christian and go along with a God like that? And you know what my answer was as a kid? I said, I don't know. I said, what I know is that Jesus is God. I don't understand how, but I know that I'm following Jesus. You got to decide somewhere along, folks. You got to decide who is supreme in your life, who is number one, who is the one that calls all the shots, who is the one who's Lord. And for me as a little kid, Jesus was it all. Jesus was everything. And I was giving my life to Jesus, not to the church, not to the preacher, not the theologians. I was giving it to Jesus, and I was going to try and follow him. That's what I was trying to do. Well, if you look at this first phrase, he is the supreme of all creation. Well, let's look at how is he supreme. That's the first thing Paul do. I called it the scope of his supremacy. Another way of saying that is, what are the ways that he is the best? As you compare him to other philosophies, other religions, other leaders, other choices, people who may sound smarter, how is he the best? Tell us the ways. Paul gives us a list right quick at the very beginning here. He gives us the list of the ways that Jesus is the best. And I'll tell you what, it really helped me in my young Christian life. If you'll notice, he starts out by the first way, he says that he is the best, the supreme, because he's the best way to imagine an invisible God. He's the best way to visualize God who is invisible. As some put it, he is the best visible image of the invisible God. The Bible says in Colossians 15 that they've read to us, the Son is the image of the invisible God. I see, Ann, you're here today. Tell us, Ann, you want to take a shot at this? Tell us, what does it mean? What's an image?
What's that now?
I was going to say, can you tell us, what do you think Paul's talking about when he says Jesus is the image? What is an image? What's it for? Any ideas?
Well, a picture, maybe a reflection.
Okay. Anybody else want to help her out? What do you think an image is in our day and time?
Something you can see.
Something
What do we?
visible.
Why do we use images?
X-rays, MRIs, CAT scans.
There you go. Boy, some of us are really
Records
into
it in
imaging, aren't we?
memory better than words.
There you go.
Representation.
I want to go back to back to Roger. Why do we like imaging so much? Those of us who are trying to see things, why do we like, quote, imaging?
It's so revealing.
Yeah. Images.
Simplify.
Yeah, there you go.
Clarifies.
All right.
So, I mean, I guess to go back to one of your points about a lot of the images in the Bible talk about military strength and I think we need to grapple a little bit with the fact part of our image should be that we're part of a violent species, and that part of the Bible's teaching is to help us, sort of rectify that with what is more appropriate behavior and what's more righteous, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, just another word on imaging. An image is always something physical, something you can see. And maybe an image is like, I think Roger was talking to somebody said it, is an image is a revealer. It's something you can't see. Like I can't see my bones, but the image can show me those bones. The image is something that shows us something we can't see with our naked eye. And that is the idea they had in Paul's day when he says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He's saying, if you want to see what you can't see with your own eyes, your own brain, you can't figure it out, look at Jesus. He'll give you the idea. He'll point you. He'll give you a picture, something that your physical mind can put together, and you get a hint at what God is like. You can't see God. You can't really tell for sure. You look at the Old Testament, you get some ideas about God. He's strong, he's powerful, he's merciful, he's all this stuff. But when you say to yourself, but I can't really get my hands on it real clearly, he says, okay, I'll tell you what you do. Look at Jesus. That's what helped me as a little boy. I said, well, I can't quite get it all together. But I found out if I look at Jesus, it's a very, very clear. Maybe not as clear as I want it sometimes, but as clear as I'm going to get it as what is God like. Because Jesus, as McGee says, Jesus is God in clothing, in human clothing. In other words, you got to decide. You and I have to decide. Paul says, I know you got a lot of people telling you what God is like. I know a lot of people telling you how you can get close to God, how you can go to heaven. He said, let me tell you what I think. He's saying, what you must do is trust somebody. And the one, if you look at, who is the most trustworthy, the one that you can put your life in is Jesus. And he is the bit. You can turn somebody else that sounds better, but look at the whole package. Look at what he did. Any of these people able to do what Jesus did? Any of these people able to be raised from the dead, be able to heal the sick? Trust the one who has all the credentials. He is the best image, the supreme image. And when we talk about this image business, I asked Julie to answer this. Julie, God uses images, visual images, and he gave his listeners verbal descriptions of events that were like mini movies or mini scripts to help understand the important truths of invisible spiritual things. I asked her, please give us some insights as to what could be some of the reason Jesus used parables. He used these visual things to help us understand very difficult situations. What are some of your reasons you came up with?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple weeks ago, Cheryl forwarded to all of us your drawing of the father welcoming the prodigal son back. And certainly, I think that telling that parable helps us to have a better understanding of God's love and mercy and grace for all of us. But I also think that by telling more theoretical things and using real world examples like that helped all of us even today to understand how we should be living. And I think about the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Not that heaven is somewhere far away, but that this is how we are to live on earth. And I think the story of the prodigal son, every character shows us how to live. Certainly the father being forgiving and welcoming and having mercy and love and compassion for his son gives us a good example of how to behave and how to treat others. But the prodigal son, to me, the lesson from him is he didn't just come back and give his father a laundry list of demands after he squandered his inheritance, after asking for it early. First, he humbled himself. He realized the error of his ways. He worked as a slave and then realized, I'm feeding pigs better than I'm nourishing myself. And he went back to his father and begged for forgiveness, and also humbled himself and asked to work as a servant, not to just have it given to him again. And then I think about his brother, who was so angry because he had been the hardworking person that stayed next to his father all of the time. And I think of there's so many times that we might be in a work or a family situation and feel like, oh, am I carrying more of the burden than everyone else? And then it reminds me that, I don't need to worry necessarily about what someone else does. Sometimes work and knowing that we did our best, that needs to be its own reward. And we don't need to worry about what someone else did or didn't do. So to me, it helps us to understand things by putting it in real world context, but it also helps us to understand and think of scenarios where we could be more Christ-like in our everyday life.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Mark, taking
Yeah.
another step,
Well,
I mentioned that some of the theologians, Bible teachers, say that the parables are kind of like Julie was saying. The parables are are verbal pictures. Or I think, let's see, one fellow said parables. Where is it? Oh yeah, here it is. Parables are actually verbal pictures. What do they mean by that, and how do you see that in a parable?
Well, I mean, a story is a great way to teach, right? So Jesus used parables, and well, you started this whole lesson with a story, right? And so that kind of gets sometimes a frame of reference. If you look at the Good Samaritan as a parable, you can see yourself in the story. What would I have done in that circumstance, right? So you maybe even modify, well, what if this happened? What if that happened? So I think it takes a little bit more, makes a more realistic example and something that you can sort of work within your mind. So I think that's one way to think of it, as an image that teaches.
Thank you, Mark. That's so true. And that literally for hundreds of years, religious teachers, rabbis, those kind of folks had been debating these difficult questions, like what is God like? What does God feel like? What does God think like? How should I think? And they would always, as you remember, I found out in studying the parables, there were always somebody asking Jesus a question or somebody saying something that was really out in left field. And the people were debating things. And Jesus, when they'd say, "Well, what do you think, Jesus?" And he would immediately give a parable. He wouldn't give an explanation. He wouldn't give a lesson. They'd been given explanations for hundreds of years, but Jesus transformed the world. I mean, the whole world, because people understood and could, like you were saying, Mark, you could put themselves in these places. They understood what was being said here and believed this is what God was saying. And that is when they told a story. And by telling that story, the people could apply it to their own hearts. Or maybe it's not only them, maybe the Holy Spirit is applying it to their hearts. I remember when I was a pastor, I'd preach these sermons and I thought they were pretty good. And people would come to, that's the old day when the preacher would stand at the door and people would shake your hand as they go out. And people would say something about your sermon. 9 times out of 10, the only thing people ever said was something about a story that was told. They'd go home and I'd tell you, I would bet you my bottom dollar they couldn't tell you what that sermon was about. They had no idea of all those wonderful ideas. The one thing they would remember, I remember that story you told at the beginning or the end. That's what they did about Jesus. If Jesus had answered the question, what is God like? If he had given all this explanation and all these platitudes that sometimes we come up with to trying to impress people, they won't remember it a bit. But what the people will remember is a story that sticks with them for the rest of their lives. And I think that's one of the main reasons Jesus told people, and maybe that's the reason we need to tell stories, not just to others. We need to tell them to ourselves. Whenever we get in a hard place, we're feeling down in the dumps. Maybe it's that we need to go back and have that picture in our minds. I talked this past week to a psychiatrist who told me that people don't think in words, they think in pictures. And so if you want, in fact, you know this, you dream in pictures, you don't dream in words. And therefore, if you want to have something that will drive you and change your emotions, change your attitude, begin to picture those parables, begin to picture those things that Jesus did. And when you picture them, you'll put yourself in those places and it'll make a difference in your life. I want to tell you about a picture. When Phyllis and I lived in San Antonio, we had a very interesting experience one time. Some of you know that the most famous picture of Jesus in the world is this picture. This is just a photo of it. Do you see that? I imagine everybody here knows that picture by heart. This is the picture called Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. It was by a German artist named Heinrich Hoffmann in 1890. And Hoffman painted this picture out of his own mind. And this picture has become the most famous picture of Jesus in the world. It's in somebody, I don't know how the world they calculate it, almost 90,000 churches, stained glass windows across the world have this picture or one like it that depicts Jesus kneeling in the garden. Think about that. Nearly 90,000 stained glass windows. Nearly every church that has a picture of Jesus in their stained glass or in some of their rooms. I think every children's department in churches, many churches across our land have that picture of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. I know as a little child, when I would go into my mother's classroom, when she was teaching the children about Jesus, she had that very a print of that very picture. Hundreds of thousands of times that picture has been printed. And why am I telling you this? Because a funny thing happens. I'll just insert this. There was a day when there was a man, a very wealthy philanthropist, borrowed this picture from New York Riverside Church, who is probably one of the wealthiest churches in the country. And they own this picture, and it's worth millions of dollars. It's never been for sale. Well, he was borrowing it to show it across the country. Well, one of the things he did was he invited people to fundraisers where they could observe the picture close up. And we volunteered to have it in our home. And Phil's remembered it well. He came with this picture in a kind of a suitcase. It was a vault-like case. It was fireproof, crush-proof, everproof. And he brought it and set it up so that you could observe it. And we invited people who wanted to see that original picture. And it was a big fundraiser. But what was really shocking to us is that he was going to go spend the night in a hotel, but he wanted us to keep it inside that case and hide it in our house. And we thought, holy moly, we could hardly sleep, that daggum thing in our house. But what he did before he left, he let me put it on an easel and stare at it for hours. I just love, being an artist, of course, I love to look at how it was put together, every brushstroke, every brushstroke. It was just amazing. But there was something about that painting, it just steaming it in my mind. All it was about Jesus before the cross, after the cross, during the cross, in that garden. It just kept telling me what Jesus like, what our Father is like. You know what I'm saying? There's something about a picture. There's something about a parable. There's something about an image. Our minds, as we're learning more and more about the brain, our minds and our brains have images in them. We have a library of moving pictures. That's where we get our dreams. And this library is either filled with that junk that we look at, or it's got both the junk we can't help but see, or it's also got things that we put in there because we want it to be there, like images, maybe pictures of the parables, maybe stories that Jesus told, and we turn them into a moving picture. And then whenever we find ourselves in ICU and we really feel down and we got to think about something, and we go to our library and think, what can we think about? Oh, yeah, maybe we can think about the people we love. There are all kinds of things we can think about. But one thing for sure, if you brought up like I have, and you go back to that childhood experience, you automatically start thinking about Jesus. And what do you think? You think about the time about the prodigal son who came home. What kind of a father did he find? And you think about, well, if he's that way, he's with me. You think about that poor lady who had been sick all her life, and Jesus helped her stand up. And I said to myself, well, if he do that for her, he's with me and mine. We can use those images to remind us of what God is really like. I think if we look at this lesson, what Paul is trying to do here when he says this at the very beginning, we're getting the very beginning of Colossians. And I think he started off in this most powerful, beautiful way. The first thing he says here, that he is the image of the invisible God. And he's saying God chose to use these images to help us see his feelings, his thinking, his way, so that when we say we're going to follow Jesus, so we'll know just how to do it. And I think myself, that's exactly what this is trying to tell us to do. Do this to help others. When we explain God, we explain Jesus. It's that we use the images that we have in our own mind. Next week, we're going to take the next way that why Jesus says, when Paul says that Jesus is the best and in handling a knowledge of him and how to follow him. So we'll see that next week. Ralph?
Thank you, Brother Bill. Yeah, okay. Thor and Kate and Bernines, this is why Bill leads our classes on the Bible itself. Okay, and so we're just blessed to have so many great facilitators in here, but we're always honored to have the professor helping us, through some of these lessons and such. So, a couple of things before I forget to tell you guys. Thank you for all you who responded to the request for donation. Everybody who did respond was in the affirmative. So I'll have that money transferred from our account to Jean Ann, however she wants to do it. So I'll send that note to her tomorrow and we'll get that done. So I appreciate that. And a little background on the devotion I wrote earlier from Billy Graham. Mark reminded me because it was done. He had just finished doing a tour of the Arlington Cemetery with Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was the Allied Supreme Commander, during the war. So when Mark said that, I thought, oh my gosh, I forgot to mention that to you guys. And then Bill brought up the Supreme. I thought, oh my gosh, it all coming together, with that. And so I will tell you all that this idea of pictures is a strong thing. If you have kids or anybody, we're always getting pictures, of our grandkids or my kids or stuff. Now, I do generally get pictures of what they're eating for lunch, and I don't really care to get, but that's okay. A few weeks ago, to Bill's point about sermons, a few weeks ago, Kim mentioned something that in their sermon about the fact that she wondered sometimes how many of us were really paying attention, or were we already thinking about where we were going to eat and how we're going to beat the Catholics there. Okay, before they get out of church. And so Cindy and I went to lunch, and I took a picture of our lunch, and I sent it to Pastor Kim. And I said, see, I was paying attention, to what you were saying, okay? And she goes, I don't think you got the point, John. But I said, obviously not. But the images, images are low. And I've been trying all morning now to get that image of that Supreme Pizza out of my head, Julie. So thank you for that, Phyllis.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to give you a thought to help you get that pizza out of your mind, all right?
Thank you, brother, sister.
I don't know. I've always been interested in when people pray, do you have any kind of visual as you pray, or do you just close your eyes? Is it darkness, or do you open your eyes and you look to the heavens, or what do you see when you're praying? What do you imagine? Because we know that faith is a lot of imagination, and Bill can straighten that out later because that's a big thought. But one thing that helps me to pray is to have this visual image of Jesus. The only visual image I can conjure of God, I know that Jesus is God, is, some great, huge being sitting on a huge throne surrounded by angels. And that's a difficult image for me to get close to. And maybe that's my own shortcoming. But when I have closed my eyes and I can imagine Jesus as a real person, as a real human being, and the chosen kind of, it dictates a little bit about what my thoughts are of his looks. But if I can imagine him sitting right over there in that green chair when Bill and I are praying, it somehow really helps me, that visual image of the invisible God, to show his nearness to me in that image.
Beautiful, Phyllis. Thank you. That's a really
Let
good
me
point.
let me say one
Yeah.
other word. I've asked Elaine to talk about how we can use these images of Jesus stories, or the stories about Jesus, how we can practically use them in our own lives, and maybe some parables explain how we can better know God and so forth. So that's going to be the way we open next week. And Elaine's, you're all prepared for next week already. But let's look forward to it. I hope some of you others will think about ways that we can use these images that Jesus gave us to help our children, to help us, so we're not dependent on the images that the world gives us.
Amen. As we wrap up, Bill started as we went through this section of Colossians about Jesus being the supreme. And then, Bill, you asked us, or maybe you were telling us, is he supreme in your life? And I wrote that down, and next to it, I put question mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Because I think I go back and forth, to be honest. So I wrote that down. So I take that away most from today. Is he supreme in my life? Working on it.
Do you want him to be?
Do you want him to be supreme?
That's like the first question.
Yeah, so Bill, so thank you for a tremendous study to start with. Again, back in Colossians, and we look forward to Elaine sharing. I think you're glad it's next week, okay, and not today.
Maybe that was my story for Anne.
So everybody's relieved, Bill. Yeah. So hey,
Yeah.
have a great week. Thank you again. Mark, continue to get better, and then we'll see y'all next time. God bless.
Thank you.
You need to-
Yeah.